Okay.
What factors are considered when establishing in-stream flow numbers, and why are these flows important to fish and fish habitat?
Well, the numbers of fish that can be produced by a stream depends on the size and shape of the channel, and then how much water is flowing through that channel influences both the quantity and the quality of the habitat, and so the carrying capacity. Each different life stage of each species has slightly different requirements, which allows different species to live together, because when one is doing one thing in one place, another is doing something else in a different place. So you have, for example, fish that spawn in the fall, many of the salmon that come in the fall. Some come in early in the fall or late summer, like the pinks and the chinook. And they spawn migrate and spawn when flows are fairly low. This has become an issue for that's tended to limit the ability of the river to produce fish when the fish cannot get through some of the shallower riffles. Jonathan Core from our department has done a lot of measurements up here looking at critical riffles to see what flows are necessary to make them passable to fish, so that just getting the adults back to the stream once they've successfully made it out of the stream, out to the ocean, and then come back in. If the gates close because the flows are too low, then they can't come in and spawn, and so there will not be as much of a next generation.
And when you say carrying capacity, is that what you're referring to?
Yes, that's that's not the sort of this gate effect. That's once they get into the river, how much space is there for them to spawn and rear, spawn and incubate and rear in. So it's a volume and but also it's affected by quality. So, for example, if one particular spot in the river is sufficiently deep, then the fish can swim in there. But it's also important how fast is the flow. If it's going very, very fast, then they have to exert so much energy that then they need a lot of food. They may not be able to grow because they're just expending too much energy for the amount of energy they can take in food. If it's not flowing fast enough, it can also be a problem, whether it's for juvenile fish that need food transported to them. They're drift feeders, and you'll watch them just sitting in the current at a place where the current speed is not too severe, but it's strong enough to keep bringing food to them. So they don't have to move very far. They pick it off as it drifts to them. So it's that balance of the right velocity, enough depth, and for each different life stage, the requirements are a little different. And these fish have adapted over tens of thousands of years to the kinds of conditions and the timing of the hydrological events so that they adapt well to that hydrology.
And in terms of poor flows, are the consequences poor fish health, fish death, a combination? What happens there?
It depends. They can be I mentioned the sort of gate effect of migration flows. If the flows are too low at the time the adult fish are trying to go upstream to find a place to spawn, and they can't get there, then they may spawn less effectively, and that the eggs will all be crowded in the same area. Some of them will be dug out by other ones coming because they can't get any farther upstream. They can't spread out. And then when the young hatch, there is the question of will they be crowded together again? So if you snorkel through these pools and riffles, you'll see a moderate number of fish in each pool, typically at the head of a pool where there's food coming down to them. Well, if you put too many fish in there, you'll exceed the ability of the stream to provide them food. They won't grow, and they'll, if they haven't grown, there's gradual mortality, and it's not something where you go out and you see, oh, there's dead fish all over. What you see instead is just, well, they're not getting much bigger, and gradually there's fewer and fewer. So it's a matter of living space and quality of that living space. So that's really what is the carrying capacity concern. Another concern that we have, if fish spawn when, and this is particularly for fall spawning fish such as most of the salmon, if they spawn when the flows are very low, then that means they're spawning and they spawn in the faster flowing areas, so in the riffles where there's lots of gravel and current, but it tends to be shallow, and it tends to be towards the middle. The water's only flowing in the middle of the channel during the lowest flows. If that's where they put their eggs, those eggs then have to stay right in that spot for months, because a fish that spawns in September or October, its eggs stay there until January, February, March, depending somewhat on the temperatures. Well, we all know that no matter how dry it may be in the summertime here, it can be very wet in November, December, January, and February, and it tends to come in a bunch. So if you get especially if you get a warm rain on snow, and you get a big gully washer, that will not only fill that channel, it will also tend to move some of that gravel. It will actually wash out some of the eggs, kill off large numbers of eggs, and the more that they have had to be concentrated in the center of the channel because of low flows during spawning time, the greater risk of losing those to a flood scour in the incubation months during the winter time. So the time component there of incubation, spawning and incubations, so you wouldn't think, as you're out there watching fish spawn in September, that what happens around Christmas is going to be all that critical, but it's extremely critical, and the survival is much likely to be higher if the flows in September are larger, because then the fish can spread out in those riffles and be up on the edges and not concentrated down where the greatest force of the water is going to be during a flood. So that's an important element too.
And which particular fish in the Dungeness are we concerned about?
We're concerned about steelheads. We're concerned about pink salmon, although they have done fairly well recently. They were one of the species that certainly caused a lot of concern. Chinook salmon are another one that's listed. Bull trout are listed. So 3 of those are fall spawners. Only the steelhead are spring spawners. The spring spawners, spawning and incubation are less of a concern. Incubation may be a bit of a concern if they're very late spawner, late in the spring. And in some places it can be a concern, but the incubation for steelhead is generally not a major concern here. It's not been such a limiting factor. The factor with steelhead is that they rear, the young spend 2 years in the stream growing, so they get a slow start because being the last ones to spawn clear into the spring, they're the last ones to emerge. So all the other salmon have come out and they're up to, a couple of inches, and the little steelhead are only about an inch when they come out. And so they're playing catch up all summer, but they go clear through that summer, stay in the stream, and then they stay in the stream for another summer. And in that second summer, they're the big guys in the stream. They're, they're 4, 5, 6, sometimes 8 inches long, and they are then dominating, holding in the fastest water. They want the fastest water because it's bringing food to them faster, and they put on that growth and then wait through another winter and out the next spring with the high flows out to the ocean.
And which fish in the Dungeness are on the endangered list?
Okay, so those 4 that I mentioned, let's see, bull trout, steelhead, Chinook salmon, and I did not mention the summer chum salmon, the 4 that are listed. So the pink are not listed. They had a downturn that caused concern in the Dungeness.
We need to redo that one because you asked the question about the ESA listing, but you didn't mention ESA in it, and we're going to cut her out and just have you. So I think we need to mention. Okay, Ann.
So I'm not
I'm
sure.
going to take on it because she mentioned Endangered Species Act, but we're going to cut her question out. It'll just be your answer, so we need to have you mention the endangered. You need to say, under the Endangered Species Act, we have, X species. And, okay, let's do that one again.
Okay.
All right, so under the Endangered Species Act, the Federal Endangered Species Act, steelhead are listed, Chinook salmon are listed, summer chum salmon are listed, and bull trout are listed. So, and all of these are listed in the Dungeness.
Okay. Any other questions?
I think that's it.
Can we just do the first one again, because I had that stuff in the background.
Sorry. Well, that was the long one.
We need to make it a little shorter. That was like 2-minute answers, not the 10-minute answers. So
Yeah,
the
the trouble is, it's such a big question that has so many parts.
Okay, well, let's try a second take and see if
Distill it down.
we'll see if we can work with this one as well.
Okay.
So that first question.
You ready?
Yeah.